The debate around voter ID expected to begin. Insights from the Voters' Voices poll. America's talking and Illinois in focus. This is the Center Square Daily for Tuesday, March 17th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Today is Election Day in Illinois, and primary contests across the state could be decided tonight. Other states have primaries scheduled in the weeks and months ahead, and we'll be taking a look at those. But the general midterm election nationwide is scheduled for November 3rd. But as voters in Illinois and other states have access to mail-in ballots without many restrictions on the reason as to why they want to have those mail-in ballots, Illinois voters also do not have to show voter ID at the polls as required in most of the country. Some members in Congress, they're looking to require voter ID for federal elections. The U.S. Senate will hold a majority threshold vote today to kick off what is expected to be a marathon to take up the Save America Act. Is this a move that'll get around the filibuster? It's being called a hybrid talking filibuster in the U.S. Senate, with lawmakers on both sides expected to possibly spend days making their case for and against the bill, before Senate Majority Leader John Thune finally invokes cloture and looks to get a 60-vote threshold, which would still apply to that vote. Now, the move, it's expected to force Democrats to get on the floor and to have to defend their position against the bill that would require voter ID, citizens-only voting, and several other provisions, while giving Republicans an opportunity to rebut the Democrats' opposition. But the big question is whether it's expected to potentially change any minds of enough Democrats to vote for the bill to exceed that 60-vote threshold. President Donald Trump Monday, he urged Senate Majority Leader John Thune to get it done.
I hope John Thune can get it across the line. He's trying. I mean, he told me this morning, I spoke to him, he's trying. I think it'll be a very, very bad thing for our country if they don't. We're just asking for basic things. They want voter ID, but the Democrats don't. Everybody wants voter ID. Everybody wants proof of citizenship. And most people don't want mail-in voting because they know it's a fraud. Touches too many hands. I mean, the postman gets it, this one gets it, that one. So these are all issues that are in the 90s to 100.
Now, the president there throwing out what could be made up polling numbers, but how do voters really feel about voter ID laws? And what about some of those other issues that voters have top of mind in this election year? Let's now welcome in Mike Noble, founder and CEO of Noble Predictive Insights, to give us those insights that he found from some of his latest polling. Mike, appreciate you joining us here for the Center Square Daily, and we'll talk about those latest numbers, but with the voter ID proposal expected to dominate headlines coming out of the U.S. Senate this week, what did you guys find out late last year about voter sentiment around voter ID and mail-in balloting?
Yeah, that's a great question, and from the recent voter voice poll by the Center Square, which is a big national survey. We did over 2,000 respondents, and we found that Donald Trump is actually on the right side of the people when it comes to this issue. So not only Democrats are split on this issue with 49% supporting it, with 41% opposing it, Trump's proposed voter ID requirement. Republicans, no surprise, they're unanimously on board with the president, 92 to 6%. Only 6% opposition, but the true tiebreaker, those true independents, so which is about 10-15% of the total electorate that don't lean one side or the other in the Republican-Democrat fight, they're 3-1 in support of the president. So I don't agree with them that 100% of people support it, but the overwhelming majority are very much on board, and they're strong majorities among Hispanic, Latino voters and African American voters.
It's interesting, the president using, kind of a type of polling. I don't know where he's getting his data, but, here's the president yesterday talking about this very issue.
The Save America Act, voter ID with a picture, right? That's a 99% issue. Even among Democrats, Democrats poll at 89% on that. And then they have proof of citizenship. And then they have no mail-in ballots. No mail-in ballots.
Yeah, the president known for being somewhat bombastic and speaking off the cuff, but you're indicating that he seems to be on the right trail. This is a very popular issue across the political spectrum.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly popular across the political spectrum, especially key voter blocks. Again, Hispanic Latinos, African Americans, but again, true independents, that swing vote that's really important in general elections. And even Democrats are split on this issue, which is interesting and also telling. So he may be ingratiating just a little bit. However, he's not wrong to say, in the latest polling by the Center Square shows, voters are very much on board. And I think this is why it's a good issue. He's going to press it. And Democrats, this is kind of a bit of a loser for them politically.
Voter ID is just one issue, but he's also been pretty adamant about mail-in voting and saying that that needs to be restricted quite a bit. Tell us about that.
It's interesting. So this one is kind of a little juxtaposed to the previous issue. So Trump is dead on when it comes to requiring voter ID. However, I think he's on the opposite side when it comes to banning mail-in voting. Mail-in voting, decent support among Republicans, 77% in favor, 20% opposed. But basically the same amount are in opposition, though, of Democrats. So the Republicans and Democrats kind of cancel each other out. They're very polarized on this mail-in voting issue. But those all-important independents, by about 50 to 36, they're in opposition against the proposed ban. And what's even more interesting, when you look at the Western U.S., the broad mail-in vote that has much more broad mail-in voting habits compared to some other areas, like in states like Arizona and Nevada, they've been doing early voting a lot longer than some of these new states, post-COVID. And we saw that among the Western U.S., there's definitely a bit more of opposition to this ban, especially the folks that have been around it and have seen it for a little bit. There's more opposition there compared to the newcomers to mail-in voting.
Another issue that you guys with Noble Predictive Insights found late last year in the polling for the Center Square was about election integrity and trust in elections. And some interesting data you guys found there, especially as we're now in that 2026 election year.
Yeah, it's interesting with when it comes to trust in elections. Like, Republicans are now more confident in the fairness of elections. 72% of Republicans are actually more confident in the upcoming 2026 elections compared to Democrats. Only 47% of them are confident, and those independents in the middle, 45%. So interestingly, just a few years ago, Republicans were the biggest negative Nancy's when it came to confidence in elections. However, 2024 turned out pretty well for them from an electoral win standpoint, and now they're actually feeling very bullish regarding the upcoming election, where Democrats and independents a little more tepid in their confidence. So interesting world we live in.
No question, especially in your insights with the polling you've done. 2,500 people polled, and just the mix that you have of Democrats, Republicans, and independents, including those true independents. And I do want to touch on that here in a moment to kind of drill down a little bit on some of the absolute latest data that you have for the Center Square. But here's the president talking about how he wants to have the voter ID law brought up and to restrict mail-in voting, but he's also injecting a few other ideas that he's said he wants to amend that bill with. And here he is again yesterday in the Oval Office.
Then I added on no men playing in women's sports, and I added in no transgender surgery, the mutilation of our children. We have no mutilation of our children, no transgender. I think they say that's an 80% issue. I think they're 99% issue.
Again, Mike, he says it's a 99% issue to, not mutilate children with transgender issues and the men and women's sports issue. How far off is he, or is he also on the right track there?
Again, this is another one. He's not wrong on that. The majority of the public is against, the integration of transgender sports, so they believe in banning that. However, it's not 100%. I mean, I've been doing polling for decades, and I would say that I have yet to find any issue that's 100%. Like, even if you believe, like, hey, is freedom the most important thing in the United States? Like, you'll get like 98%. You're always gonna have a few percent off. But like this, 2/3 of the electorate shows that they should allow, the Supreme Court should allow states and localities to be able to ban transgender women from competing in women's sports. I mean, that's not 100%. Well, I mean, again, that's a really good political issue. So again, I think he's in a good position on that one, but it's not 100. But 2/3 is pretty close.
Some other issues from the latest polling that you released just this month. And again, people can find this at thecentersquare.com. If you click on polls, you'll be able to read more about these and other issues. But the idea of, what is topping people's minds heading into this election. We'll touch on some of the breakdown there, but do people think that, it's inflation, or is it, some social issues like abortion? Break this down for us and what these key issues for voters really tells us that politicians need to be thinking about heading into the election in November.
Yeah, so when you look at this, there's a couple ways to ask top issue. What's your most important one? Or, hey, what's your top three? And I think how the Center Square asked it in the survey is probably the more realistic way. People usually have a couple issues that top their mark. So when we look at it, you see that what really screams out to me is that pocketbook issues are really the most front and center. You have inflation number one at 37%, which has been the highest recorded in the poll and was the same back in October. So again, the inflation pain point is number one. Number two is healthcare. And I know from other research done is that when drilling down into it, it's not access to care or quality care, it's really cost of care. So whether it's your medical prices or medical insurance pricing, that's really the big pain point. Government corruption, I'd say it's almost a pocketbook too, because again, you have what you're getting hit spending wise, but also, hey, the government needs to kind of rein in the government corruption and kind of the wastefulness that they've been doing. And then the economy is number four. And you notice that everything after that, you had immigration number five, but everything else below that, like kind of all the social issues have really taken a back seat. So if you have the main takeaway to see right now, the electorate, it's pocketbook. It's the economy, stupid, as you've heard some folks say in the past. I mean, that's 100% what we're seeing right now. And I think that's going to be the dominant issue heading the election. Whichever party can, I guess, best address those concerns among voters is going to be doing well come November.
And one of the questions you also asked in the most recent polling data, again, you can find at thecentersquare.com, is about the direction of the country. And seems to kind of go hand in hand as well with the approval rating of Donald Trump. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so Donald Trump's approval rating is not too far off from the direction of the country, but also just the electorate. What does this data point mean? It means, hey, are folks optimistic or pessimistic about the direction? And currently, their majority of the electorate is pessimistic. But also, we've kind of been in this state for the last 8 to 10 years. Just look at the past elections for president. I mean, you had Trump was elected initially, and then Biden won, and then you had Trump won again. But also, all three of those presidencies, they all won with roughly 50% of the vote. But within a year into their term, all three of them had really terrible job approval ratings. So they really sank. And it's just kind of like you have an A-B choice between the red team and blue team, or Republican, Democrat. And so folks just really are unhappy. So the pendulum going back between the parties, it used to go longer, 8-year terms, etc. Now it's just kind of bouncing back and forth because there's really not a third option, but they're really not happy with either of the sides these days.
Well, I think that leads us to, breaking down and drilling down into who exactly is answering questions from your polls. And let's talk about those true independents, that swing voter, so to speak, and how crucial they are to determining the wins of the country.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny for a lot of folks. I get, politics is basically a full contact sport for I like to call it for nerds, right? And so when you look at this, is that these two teams are competing, is that, what's funny is that a lot of the die is already cast when it comes to electoral outcomes. I mean, you hear a term a lot used by consultants, Democrats vote Democrat, Republicans vote Republican, and you battle for the folks in the middle. Thing is, in this really hyper polarized time frame that we're in, is that if you look at the overall electorate, especially you find it through the generic ballot, like, hey, do you normally vote for Republican or Democrat? I mean, usually about 85% of them are picking either Democrat or Republican. So that 10 to 15% that's left in the middle, what we like to call true independents, that don't lean one side or the other, like they're pretty party agnostic. I mean, that's what this poll captures, and they ultimately are the ones that decide the general election. So again, the calculus is, hey, you want to turn out your base, right? Make sure they're motivated to get out to vote. And then the other portion is, hey, win those folks in the middle that are small but mighty. But that group in the middle, that disenfranchised 10, 15%, they've chosen who the president has been the last 3 elections in a row. And again, they're not happy. And this poll is one of the unique polls that actually has a large sample size of this very hard to reach group, where we can track them over time to see where the political winds are blowing with them. So again, it's super unique, but I hope that explains it a little bit.
No, absolutely. And I think it's going to be interesting to see again as we get through this election year, maybe right before the election, what some of the sentiments are. And we'll be looking at Mike Noble, the CEO and founder of Noble Predictive Insights, and all the data that you're able to produce from reaching out to that broad base of individuals answering these types of questions and what's on the minds of voters. Greatly appreciate you taking time with us here today for the Center Square Daily. And now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country. In Minnesota, the free speech group raising concerns about a package of bills regulating artificial intelligence, warning the proposals could have unintended consequences for Minnesotans' constitutional rights. The Center Square's Elise Apel reports a bipartisan group of state lawmakers introduced a package of AI-related bills addressing healthcare decisions, children's access to chatbots, pricing, and government surveillance. The broader effort also includes a proposed amendment to the state constitution to address artificial intelligence. Supporters say the measure is intended to clarify that artificial intelligence itself doesn't have constitutional speech rights, but critics warn the language could affect the free speech of those who use artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, protecting drivers' rights to own any type of vehicle so desired, whether gas-powered, diesel, hybrid, or electric, cleared a major legislative hurdle Monday. The Center Square's regional editor, Kristen Smith, reports the state Senate there approved a bill that bans vehicle purchase mandates 28 to 22, with one Republican and one Democrat defecting on the Republican-backed measure. Senator Camera Bartolata, she introduced the legislation in July before receiving a party-line vote in the Senate, and that was in a transportation committee last year. She said Senate Bill 990 is very simple, quote, it would ban the mandate of the sale of any specific vehicle in the Commonwealth. 13 states have passed similar legislation, while another 5 are considering it. The bill awaits consideration in the Democrat-led House of Representatives, where support is outweighed. A staff member of California Senator Anna Caballero physically blocked the Center Square Monday from approaching the senator and asking questions about her recent bill concerning child abuse cases. The Center Square's Madeline Shannon reports she was wearing press credentials and was waiting in a common area at the Capitol when Caballero and the staff member exited an elevator. At the same time, another staff member left the senator's and her staff's office, and he entered the hallway that leads to Caballero's office. This was the staff member who blocked the reporter from approaching Caballero in the hallway as the Senate headed towards the office, which was just around the corner. The staffer in question would not give his name, but said Caballero's staff made it clear that she would not answer questions about her bill. The Center Square also tried to ask questions of Caballero's bill and about her bill during a Senate floor session scheduled Monday afternoon, but she declined to answer questions during and after floor session on Monday. Be sure to watch for the Center Square, California, for the latest on that story. And as Virginia lawmakers wrapped up work on firearm legislation before adjournment, they considered an ultimately rejected substitute language in House Bill 110 that Republicans said would have given General Assembly members different treatment if a bill dealing with handguns left in unattended vehicles. The Center Square's Shirlene Guerrero reports House Bill 110 in Virginia would prohibit a person from leaving behind a visible handgun in an unattended motor vehicle and impose a civil penalty of up to $500 if the bill was signed into law. A conference report substitute included language Republicans objected to, but that language was not included in the final version approved by both chambers. Final action of House Bill 110 came as lawmakers wrapped up work on a broader package of firearm-related bills sent to the first Democratic governor, Abigail Spanberger. The package includes measures on assault weapons and magazine bans, firearm industry civil liability, ghost gun serialization, a carry ban on public property, safe storage where minors or prohibited persons are present, and the domestic violence firearm removal process. So be watching the Center Square, Virginia, for the latest there. That's it for America's Talking with the Center Square Daily. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Center Square Daily. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Now let's put Illinois in focus with an Illinois Supreme Court case heard this morning in Springfield surrounding whether someone merely charged with a felony, not convicted of a felony, can have their firearm owner's ID card suspended or revoked. In a case heard by the Supreme Court in Illinois this morning, filing from the plaintiffs say even law-abiding citizens make mistakes, and at times the criminal justice system makes its own. The filing says, here, plaintiff's only mistake was traveling to visit his family in Cook County. The mistake the criminal justice system made was arresting and initiating a felony prosecution against the innocent person. While traveling, the plaintiff in this case had an unloaded firearm properly enclosed in a case and secured in the trunk of the vehicle in which he was a passenger. And the plaintiff's filing says, consistent with Illinois law, plaintiff also possessed a valid firearm owner's ID card, which he carried with him. This rendered his possession of his firearm fully compliant with statutory requirements. The vehicle was stopped, according to court documents, for a minor traffic violation, a cracked windshield, which is a violation committed by the driver of the car, not a passenger like the plaintiff in this case. The filing continues saying, following what appears to be standard police procedure, the officer who stopped the driver asked the plaintiff whether firearms were present inside the vehicle. The plaintiff truthfully answered, advising that there was an unloaded cased pistol in the trunk, and he produced his FOID card. Despite plaintiff's compliance with the various FOID statutes, plaintiff was immediately arrested and charged with carrying a loaded firearm without a valid FOID card. This felony accusation was facially untrue, the plaintiffs say in their filing, as the arresting officer knew the pistol was unloaded, secured in a case in the trunk, and the plaintiff possessed and presented a valid FOID card. Nevertheless, plaintiff's FOID card was subsequently invalidated, and from that instance, the plaintiff was prohibited from possessing a firearm anywhere in the state of Illinois. The filing from the plaintiff says federal law, however, did not require him to relinquish possession of firearms, but Illinois rendered his possession illegal. So that was a filing from the plaintiffs in this case, and in front of the Illinois Supreme Court Tuesday, arguing on behalf of the state, Carson Griffiths defended the FOID card law and said that the case should be remanded back.
This court should vacate or reverse the circuit court's judgment on either of two independent grounds. First, Bright's challenge to the temporary suspension of his FOID card is moot because his FOID card was reinstated in May 2023, and he did not make a clear showing that any mootness exception applies. Federal courts of appeals have issued several decisions that have uniformly upheld a similar federal law that prohibits the acquisition of firearms while an individual is under felony indictment. So those cases provide clear guidance to lower courts in Illinois, specifically as to the historical tradition allowing for the complete but temporary disarmament of individuals facing felony charges. Surety laws that allowed for restriction of firearm access to those reasonably accused of intending to breach the peace, and those could be entered on a finding of probable suspicion that an offense was intended, similar to the probable cause determination that accompanies felony charges.
Now, attorney Thomas Magg, representing the plaintiffs in the case challenging the FOID card law, he laid out what he says this case is really all about.
My client is a nonviolent person. He is a genuinely innocent man who was genuinely falsely arrested and genuinely violated of his constitutional rights. What we're challenging is the fact that they are deprived of the use of arms simply because ipso facto they are charged with a felony, any felony, no matter what the felony is, no matter what the evidence is. It's a total ban based on mere accusation. And there is no, other than the fact that, yes, you could lock somebody up, and the king did lock people up. That was one of the crimes of the listed in the Bill of Rights, potentially indefinitely. That's why we have a speedy trial clause of our Constitution.
Mag, he got questions from various Supreme Court justices this morning in Springfield, where Chief Justice P. Scott Neville asked about whether the case is moot because the plaintiff eventually got his FOID card back, and how this case fits into the public interest.
Technically, it is moot, but there are exceptions to the mootness doctrine that apply that allow this case to proceed.
Does it come within the public interest exception?
All right. Why does this come with
how?
How? One, it's a matter of public interest. Constitutional rights are a matter of public interest. This is a state statute that is being enforced by the Illinois State Police that regulates a fundamental constitutional right. This is a matter that reoccurs routinely. This is actually the second time this issue has been in front of this court in the last couple of years.
Now, MAG also fielded questions from Justice Sanjay Taylor about what specifically is being challenged in this case.
So your argument really is that the statute is facially unconstitutional because it does not provide for individualized assessment of the defendant's dangerousness.
As applied through 922N, I agree with that, but there are other statutes that can be applied through Section 8N that do allow for individualized assessment, such as the mental health determination. But again, there is no historical analog to simply saying, I accuse you of a crime, therefore you cannot keep and bear arms.
So the Illinois Supreme Court justices taking that case under advisement, meaning they could issue a ruling in the weeks or months ahead. Now, the Firearm Owner ID card has been challenged in Illinois state courts for years and has been considered by the Illinois Supreme Court several times in the recent past, with outcomes leading to cases being sent back to lower courts and no true decision on the constitutionality of requiring residents to get the state's permission through a government-issued ID to exercise the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, which the Second Amendment says shall not be infringed. And that will do it for Illinois in Focus with the Center Square. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop, and join us back here Wednesday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.